This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
Greetings, community. We're doing something a bit differently today. We struggled to find a time both Adrienne and I were available this week, and we were eager to begin our employee well-being series. And this series is going to culminate in an expert panel discussion coming up at the end of April. And it's our intention to get as many perspectives as we can, including yours. But we decided to start with the co-founders. So Adrienne and I are answering questions separately, and then we're going to combine our responses into one recording. Here goes something. Welcome, Adrienne and Tom.
Well, hi there, community. So you'll notice that it's just me here for now. We're doing something a little bit differently. Let me know if this sounds familiar. Tom and I are not able to get ourselves together to do our conversation together. So we wanted to still get going and share some information and updates about our employee well-being series, starting with a panel discussion coming up next month in April. And we wanted to get going. So we decided that what we were going to do for this week's episode was to take some of the questions that we have heard from our colleagues, from our clients asking, and from our own research, knowing that people are focused on employee well-being. And it's like off the charts when you start prioritizing what is the most important topic. Employee well-being is coming up more than half the time. So we know it's important. We know it's on your minds. And we decided for this episode that we would take questions and share our answers. But what's really important is that we want to get the dialogue started because you have more real stories and more thoughtful ideas of how we can tackle this together. And that is our point in this community. So this one's going to be Tom answering some questions, and then I'm going to come back in and answer some different questions. And we're going to pull all that together and we're sharing it with you now. So here goes something. First of all, welcome, Tom. He's kicking us off and he is reflecting on these questions. How can we foster a sense of belonging and connection? Keywords there, belonging and connection among our employees, especially when we consider remote and hybrid work environments. The other question he's reflecting on is how can we foster a culture of open communication and support where employees feel comfortable discussing their well-being concerns? And finally, which is more on the enterprise level, how can we create some initiatives that promote mindfulness, resilience, and self-caring among our employees? So have a listen to Tom and his reflection against those three questions. And then I will come back and share some responses to a few different questions.
Research is conclusive. Common sense tells us human beings thrive when they have a sense of connection and belonging, and implode or stagnate, disconnect if they don't feel they have a sense of belonging. So the question is, how can we, given the reality of remote work and all of these sort of artificial connections, keep the human connections thriving in our organization? And I don't think this is a question to answer as in, here's the answer. I think it's continuing to discuss, to monitor, and to recognize that a sense of connection is different for different people. And that's why one size fits all policies on hybrid work are doomed to have gaps in them because we are all different. So the first answer to the question is to recognize and honor our differences. And one thing that just always astounds me about human beings is that each human being is unique. And at a certain level, we're all the same. I can never get to the bottom of that mystery. But if we start from there and recognize the way we're the same is we need meaning and belonging. And so the first leader task, and we talk about leaders at all levels, it's not a person, it's a mindset, it's an attitude of other people with us, connecting to the vision, bringing other people with us. So in this craziness, we need to make space for conversations with other people. If you have a large organization, that's hard to do on a large scale. So there's lots of ideas of how you can do it. And if you think of a human being as a system, you recognize there's a network of different things going on within the system, not just the nerve and the vein and all of that. We do have people in this community that could say that better technically. But the point I'm making here is first understand what connection and meaning is to the different people, and then make sure there are adequate opportunities for people to connect several networks. And so business resource groups are one way people have done it. Another one, the peer groups. Another are having more social clubs that people can form and belong to, and ways to communicate voluntarily with people that they have a sense of an affinity towards, or if they're not as people oriented, with subject matters. Some people are much more attracted to things where they explore a works subject. The other thing that's good is if you can invite differing people into different projects on an ad hoc basis. But the idea is have people connect to one another and to meaningful work. Well, just as we have hybrid work and probably an overdose of digital, but we need to have a combination between digital information available and in-person experiential. So many companies have mindfulness workshops. They have everything from physical fitness and programs, because that creates a connection as well as the type of things that are difficult to do on your own. Or if you do on your own, you might not have the other thing that we talked about before, which is this connection and belonging. But it can't just be that we have these workshops available because some people are working remotely or the day that you have them doesn't fit. So we have a colleague, and you can go to a Leadership Beyond and find the conversation we had with him, Ben Baker, and he talks about having an internal podcast. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we had some network where you could interview people about what they're doing for wellness, and it would help spread the programs you're doing. So for example, somebody's really bragging and said, oh, I really benefited from that mindfulness walking or that breathing class, or I really benefited from some other program. So it helps market the programs internally that you're having. But much more important than that is you don't just have executives saying, well, we're investing and this is working really well and we've reduced our turnover, and this tone of voice is like I'm talking negatively about that, and I don't mean that. It's not enough, and we want it to be top down, bottom up, and all across. And it's a great opportunity to do that if you can just talk to real people talking about their challenges. It's also a way to get introverts very involved, because many times the more introverted people aren't going to run around talking about it. But if you create space and give them the questions in advance, they're glad to participate. Or maybe they write, and maybe they want to be anonymous. But we can create new networks of communication that help individuals on their wellness, help connect individuals to other people, both struggling with their wellness or doing well with their wellness. Little double word there, word salad. But my point is, if we get creative around promoting wellness, opportunities will just appear, but we have to make sure to connect the dots. And it's inside out, it's individual, group, and enterprise wide. Well, we've talked a lot about resources, and I think employee assistant programs is very important, that there is a place that people can go and that the resources are provided to help people, because sometimes well-meaning people give the kind of help they're not qualified to get. And as a professional coach, I've gotten very, very good about it, because coaching is therapeutic, but I'm not qualified to give therapy. And sometimes I start to recognize it's a little beyond the scope of my ministry here. And I have several people, including one that's going to join this podcast, that are qualified and trained to give the kind of help that's really beyond a coaching initiative. It's a great challenge for leaders today to see how to fit well-being into the communication patterns. And it's essential that we do this. And I've seen several examples of where it just becomes buzzwords or giving lip service to it. I saw that with the transparency. For a while, I kept hearing people, we're going to be more transparent. And it's like, what do you really mean by that? Should we always be transparent? And so I think the first step is having real conversation on small scale, and then expanding it and encouraging people to discuss well-being openly in small group settings, and also to be mindful that there's no pressure, so that people feel safe doing it. And it really comes down to trust. Trust is the bottom line, building trust. And one of the best ways to build trust is to lead by example. And so be vulnerable, be willing to talk about your own stressors and your own well-being, and then to make sure there are available for conversations that shouldn't happen publicly, that there is availability for people to talk about things that are very private. And I think the golden rule really fits here, which is, think about how you would like to be treated. Think about how being put on the spot makes you uncomfortable, and allow space for people privately to talk about the things that need to be private. So again, not let's be all transparent. We're all sick here. And I have a little bit of humor there, only because we tend to get, the tension moves us from one pole to the other. We have it be taboo and we never talk about it. And then there's some people that want to talk about it all the time. And we need to have to get work done. So it's really about creating a balance between that real need, and that we care, and that we're empathetic, for discussions around well-being, while at the same time providing safety, and then resources. If you don't put support to it, uh, people aren't going to believe that you're sincere. Uh, Also, to recognize the emotional impact of certain policies, and so some of it is looking at policies that are almost geared to create stress and the opposite of wellness. And then I would say also, be sure to notice and address symptoms very quickly. Check in with people and really, really mean it. And sometimes, and this isn't being behind, it's not triangulation, but if you have somebody that trust somebody else, to be okay to say, I've just noticed something's not right there. Could you have a conversation and see if there's anything that we can do to support her or whatever the situation may be? So, if we're going to have well being, we have always to come back to this alignment issue. And what we mean by that is you can't just say, okay, we'll put resources to it, we'll get foosball, and then we'll say we covered recreation. We really need to align our policies with the impact they have and give one another honest feedback. And when we give feedback, make sure that we have here's the symptom or the behavior, here's the impact it's having on the people and the results, and here's a path forward. Because I think when you demonstrate through time and other resources, people say, okay, they really mean to do this, because there's no way we could have well-being policies that work for everyone, but we have to show that we care about everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Tom, for those thoughtful responses. So, these are the questions that I'm going to reflect on to contribute to this episode. First one, are there specific challenges or stressors impacting employee well being that we as employers and business leaders need to address? I say yes, right? There are some specific challenges and stressors that I think are facing employees today, and we do need to pay attention to it. Some of them maybe are age old and they've been going on for a while, and others are maybe relatively new, but I think that they are starting to come through loud and clear. The first one that comes to mind is employee workload. How many articles have you seen about burnout? Let's take a look at workload. I know from my own personal experience and what I've observed with my clients is that there could be attrition happening. There are org restructures happening. There are pauses in hiring happening. And guess what happens as a result? More work piles on to those loyal employees that are still with you. This can become a workload issue. It's not always easy for an employee to say, hey, which piece would you like me to not do because this is overload? Some of us just keep taking it and taking it and taking it, and it's starting to have impacts. It's starting to create real stressors. Maybe that's coming out not at work in the workplace. Maybe it's coming out after work with family and friends and community activities. Maybe it's coming out through health issues, physical health issues, right? The body keeps score. I heard that the other day talking to a colleague. The body keeps score. This is something we really need to pay attention to. So, where do we, getting back to some of the comments that Tom made, where do we open that communication to hear where a workload is maybe too heavy for an employee? And more importantly, how do we lighten that load? I think another stressor that is on the minds of employees is job security. We're hearing of all the reorgs and the reductions in force that are happening, the closing of facilities that are happening. Again, that contributes to workload. You close a facility, production goes where? To another facility. Okay, are we upping the staff at that facility or are we just piling on? Job insecurity. People are worried about it. Everything is more expensive now. So we're worried. We're worried about our livelihood. We're some of us are starting to really worry about making sure that we can make the basic ends meet, right? And so that's contributing to the stressors of our employees. And then I think also there's just generally workplace culture, right? And Tom mentioned some of this where we're getting to that psychological safety, that safe place to have conversations, that feeling of belonging and connection. If that is not present in your culture, that can create a stressor. And it's not to say that your culture is going to match with the values of every single employee. So sometimes this is an employee decision. If there's not a match there, then it's up to that employee to make a decision and have a thought about, is this the place I really want to be working? Take that a step further. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a manager who you felt safe enough with to say, I don't feel like this is a right fit? And that manager says, I get that. How can I help? Wow. How can I help? And maybe how can I help is, let's look at your resume. Let's look at our connections. Let's find a company that has a culture that feels better to you. And let's try to get you there, knowing that that means for that manager, they're down a person. Amazing. I mean, what an incredible place to work, right? Okay, my second question is around, what kind of training and resources can we provide to managers to better support their team members with well-being and recognizing signs of burnout and distress? So more of that formal training and resources, what can we do? Well, I have a colleague who has recently pivoted her business to focus very specifically around helping leaders recognize burnout and work through their own personal burnout. She'd be an amazing resource to have at arm's reach for managers as a benefit to employees. I'm also thinking about, how about flyers on the walls? Remember, you have walls if you have physical walls, but maybe electronic hangout places too, right? Somewhere on your SharePoint site or your homepage or your Slack channels, wherever your home base is for your company that's electronic. Can we put some flyers, virtual or real flyers, that are about well-being, that are showing some facts, some signs of stressors and what to do about it, and not just the one that you get from your EAP benefit? That's great. Call the number, here's the website. I love all that. But how can you do it smaller and more informally? Because sometimes that's a scary step for people to call an EAP. It shouldn't be. You should feel comfortable doing that, but that's not always the case. So, how can we as managers casually reach out? How can we recognize and be armed to identify, hey, I think my employee is showing signs of being really under distress? What can I do to reach out to that person and make it comfortable for them to respond? A lot of that goes back to your culture. A lot of that goes back to what Thomas already shared. I think another even deeper dive into that, arming managers with training and resources, is, how about some questionnaires that managers can have, a template, a job aid that provides some check-in questions that they can ask in their one-on-ones with their direct reports, and give some guidance on what are some of the signs where you should pause and suggest a more qualified, credentialed therapist or EAP program, and where can you just go up to that line and provide that support. I think for managers, it's really tough to understand, how do I get personal and where's that line where I get too personal? Like, how do you walk that? You don't want to come off as a manager where you aren't interested, but you also don't want to come off where you're prying, right? So, what sorts of things can we do to open the door for more? I was recently talking with a colleague of mine, and he had asked this question, and he was reflecting on a manager that he had, and said, this manager didn't seem to feel comfortable, like, really getting into it with me in terms of letting me unpack some things that were partially personal and partially work related. And there's lots of reasons for that. That manager maybe is uncomfortable for other reasons, not related to that employee. But how can we guide and offer language that says, hey, if you want to talk about this, direct report, I'm here. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing and ready to help you unpack whatever you want to unpack. But then also say, if you aren't comfortable doing that, happy to give you some other resources where you can. But just know that I'm here and I'm willing to work with you on it, and kind of leave it up to that person, but creating that safety. But questionnaires, flyers on the wall. Once we start normalizing that it's okay to bring your whole self to work, I mean, everybody's got stuff, right? And we bring it to work. It doesn't get to stay at home, or it doesn't get to stay in the other room when we come onto a Zoom meeting call in our remote working environment. It comes with us, right? We recognized this during COVID. We were empathetic with this during COVID. And I feel like maybe we're losing that a little bit. And we need to remember that we're all people, we're all humans first. And everything that's going on in our lives, we're bringing it with us to work. So it's okay to talk about it. Yes, there's boundaries, but we can we can work within those boundaries and still be supportive and helpful to our employees. Okay, third question. Are there opportunities to enhance workplace flexibility? This is a big one for me. How do we enhance workplace flexibility, such as remote work options or flexible scheduling, to better accommodate employees' personal and family needs? So, this gets to, I just wrote an article recently as a follow up on what I'm seeing for 2024 trends with return to work policies, and some of my advice and thoughts and guidance on how employers can approach this. It begins with asking your employees. So, how can we enhance workplace flexibility? Ask your employees, what do they need? Take out some surveys, get down as a manager to your team members and get down to individual questions about, what do you want? If you have the flexibility to work with your employees to create that flexibility for them, super. Now, executives who are coming up with the policies, again, I urge you to find out from your population where the sweet spot is. It's going to be different at every individual. It's also going to be different. Perhaps there's some themes you can find within departments, within teams. Yes, we are all working towards doing a job, getting work done. That's why we're here, right? That's why we're employed. But if we work together and we have conversations that are more focused around what is the outcome that we need to deliver and what are the expectations of the role, that's how we get to allowing that flexibility. Once we're grounded between employee and manager and senior leaders on, here are the expectations of these roles, here is the timeline through which we have these expectations on deliverables, on outcomes, on production. Can we then afford a little flexibility on how the work gets done? I feel strongly that that's what employees are looking for. Help them understand, what's the real connection? What am I here to do? And by the way, bonus points if you can connect this to your vision and your purpose as a company, and really help them feel that the widget they're creating goes towards and serves the higher purpose of the firm. I mean, bonus points. But when we talk about flexible scheduling, if we can frame conversations around expectations and outcomes, I think that flexibility can start coming a little bit more naturally. And you can have those check-ins. If someone is taking a little bit too much flexibility, it's not saying, hey, you're not coming into the office this many days a week. Maybe that conversation looks like, hey, you haven't met the deliverables, or you haven't reached this goal that we agreed you were going to reach. And then the next part is a question: what's going on? And here's another key piece: listen for the answer. don't already have the reprimand or the reinforcement planned and ready to go. Listen for the answer. So, community. That's my take on a few questions that we've been hearing. You heard Tom's take on a few different questions, but related, that we have been hearing kind of in the conversation with our clients and our colleagues. That's going to be a wrap for today for this episode, but stay tuned because coming up in April, we will be introducing our panel series with the first panel. We're going to have some wonderful thought leaders from a research perspective, from a clinical perspective, joining us to talk about this very thing, employee well-being. And it's going to be great. We look forward to sharing it with you. We suspect that it might not be the only panel discussion we do on this topic because it is such a hot one, but we've got a sprinkling of other topics that have peppered in as well that are important to you too. So we're going to be doing those as some additional panel discussions. Stay tuned, everyone, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.